to be here.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And Kirk, thank you so much. And I don't know that I've been a mentor to you, but you've been a fellow traveler with me. And that's been amazing, amazing for me to watch you change and grow. Even when you put on your Zen robes, it hasn't diminished you as a human being. So that's wonderful. Um, and it's wonderful to see this group. Like, even though I don't like the Zoom format because it often feels so distant and impersonal and cold, but right away I have the feeling that this is a group of friends, of people coming together to support each other. And and what strikes me is how wonderful it is how Buddhism evolves. You couldn't imagine this kind of group even 20, 30 years ago, not only because of the technology, but because of the self creation, the coming together of people to help each other move along and find new formats to do that. And that's sort of what I want to talk about um, how certain notions in Buddhism keep changing over time and how important it is that they change. And that this group, for example, and it's something I want to touch on later, really forms itself in connection with the creation of 12-step programs and of the ability that the modern world has gifted us of finding ways of mutual and organic support. When I first came into Buddhist practice, it was all about the teacher. And one reason I came to Buddhism was that I expected to be the recipient of this extraordinary gift of these enlightened people who were going to shine on me and transform me. And when I first went to the Zen Center in the 70s and I met Baker Roshi, I thought, yes, this is the real deal. I don't think he was taller than me, but in my memory, he seems like he was 20 feet tall. He talked down to me. I felt about 1 inch high. And every word he said seemed absolutely authoritative and important. And of course, not long after, there was a scandal and he had to leave. And not only he, but over the next 20, 30 years, many of the biggest names in the Buddhist American world fell, toppled by scandal, by sexual abuse, substance abuse, mental abuse. And and it was something that really shook the Buddhist community. A lot of people in these sanghas not only were disenchanted with their teacher, but they were disenchanted with Buddhism. And that's a terrible thing to have happened. And it made me think about that and about what it is that we expect from Buddhist teachers and what is reasonable to expect. I was a teacher all these years. I taught Shakespeare. And if I was involved in a scandal, the students might have had difficult feelings towards me, but they didn't have difficult feelings towards Shakespeare. And they wouldn't even have difficult feelings towards what I taught about Shakespeare because my being was separate from what I was teaching. But in Buddhism, the connection between the teaching and the teacher is very, very deep. And it's a powerful part of the tradition of Buddhism, and it's also a problematic part. The sort of the iconic way I got my most powerful hit of this classical notion of the teacher was through the story of Milarepa in Tibetan Buddhism, one of the great teachers, one of the founding figures in Tibetan Buddhism. And it's a story I'm sure many of you know, where he was meditating in a cave for many years, and then he came back to the cave one day. It was full of demons, and he had to find a way to deal with it. And so he talked to them, he prayed to them, he read sutras to them, he meditated. Finally, almost all of them were gone, but one big demon was left. And he just gave up, and he goes over to the demon and puts his head in the demon's mouth and says, "Okay, take me, I give up." And when he says that, the demon disappears, and he's left in this empty room, empty of demons. In other words, he reaches a state on the other side of normal human existence, a person without demons. Now, this is a wonderful, powerful spiritual teaching. 5 minutes already? Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is my phone, oh dear. But, it's powerful because it suggests both that it's possible for human beings to do that, but also that it takes a kind of superhuman determination, courage, and energy to get rid of your demons. The downside of the story is the onus it puts on teachers to somehow reach a place to have a cave that has no demons in it. In other words, there's a requirement that comes from this kind of image of teaching that the teacher be on the other side of humanity. And it also suggests that the student is at a different level of being than the teacher. The student is full of demons and the teacher has no demons. So that the teaching, direction of the teaching goes from teacher down to student and not the other way around. And of course, this is a recipe for disaster because most teachers are actually human beings and most students are actually teachers. So I would want to reimagine that story to be more in tune with what we as modern human beings understand and works for us. I mean, if Milarepa went over to the demon, instead of putting his head in the demon's mouth, he opened his mouth and swallowed the demon and put the demon right into his belly and told the demon, "You're going to sit there, you're going to be safe, I'm going to take care of you, go to sleep. I'm carrying you with me." This model means that no matter how enlightened, so to speak, a person is, they carry the demon with them, inside of them. And their spiritual expertise is how to live and be fully accomplished human beings while pacifying and nourishing that demon. And the difference between the teacher and the student is simply that the teacher knows much more about how to live with the demon. And this is, in a way, how it connects, in my mind, with the 12-step program. The 12-step programs famously say we have no teachers, we have trusted servants, but no one is in charge. And yet, of course, it's a teaching vehicle. You come in and you are taught about how to live without drugs or sex or whatever it is. How do you do that? Well, one way is that in the 12-step programs, everybody understands that we all have the demon within us, that at any moment that demon can erupt. As they say in NA, you take a drug, one is too many, 1,000 never enough. You're always at that precipice. And because of that, not only do you live with vigilance and care, but also everybody in that group, whether they have 40 years clean or a week, is in some radical sense equal. Everyone is connected to everyone else, and everyone can be the teacher and everyone can be the student. And these roles can change and turn any moment because everybody is grappling with the same thing. And this really goes back to the fundamental Buddhist principle that there is suffering in the world and no one is free of suffering. Because the demons that Milarepa talks about are just suffering. The demons of desire, aversion, ignorance, the sources of suffering. And that somehow we need to find fellowship within us that recognizes and accepts and is comfortable with that suffering in all beings. Dogen, in his talk about enlightenment, of course, very complicated, but one thing he essentially says that enlightenment is never finished. You have a moment of enlightenment, and then you're back into non-enlightenment. And this is a process that keeps on going. You're never finished. And because of that, you're in a state of electric presence to your reality. The other one of the stories about the Dalai Lama that I really love is the Dalai Lama was talking about having good feelings towards the Chinese, in spite of the fact that the Chinese, conquered his country, wiped out his religion, killed his people, forced him into exile. And someone said to him, "Don't you ever get angry, Your Holiness?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I get angry, but only for 30 seconds. What he was saying, I have the demon in me. I can get angry. But also my accomplishment is that I can let go of the anger." So I think that this notion of people self-organizing around principles is modern, but it also goes back to the very beginning of Buddhism. When the Buddha was about to die, people said, "What are we going to do without you?" And he said, "I gave you the teachings. I gave you all you need to know. All you need to do is discover that for yourself." He didn't appoint another teacher. So I don't mean to put down the role of the teacher, which is so powerful, but to suggest the ways in which we can reimagine the teacher so that we don't burden the teacher or ourselves with expectations that are not really human. And that way we can have a more forgiving sense if teachers have problems, and more forgiving for ourselves when we can't reach this notion that we think we have of what it would mean to be enlightened and free. And the last thing I want to say is that one of the things that seems to me to mark a great teacher is the teacher's humility and the teacher's understanding of her or his own limits. My father was a rabbinic scholar, and he would give long talks after the meal that I never listened to. But I remember one talk he gave that did impress me, and he was talking about Moses. And Moses in Jewish mythology is famous not only for being the greatest prophet, but for being the most humble man. And so my father asked, how could he be humble when he went up to the mountain and he spoke to God directly, saw God's back? He reached the pinnacle of what human beings can do. And the answer was that precisely because he went up the mountain and he saw how vast and unbelievably incomprehensible the grandeur of the world and of the divine is, he realized that his difference from other people was minuscule, that all of us have to be humble in the face of reality. I think that's my 20 minutes. Kirk,
Thank you, Larry. That was beautiful.
thank you.
Um, yeah. Well, why don't we sit for a little bit and then I'll ring some bells and then we can have some question and answer and maybe some discussion. Okay. So, Larry, thank you. That was great. You really got my wheels turning there. I was thinking so much about the difference between 12-step programs and Buddhist outfits. And it's like the distribution of power in those situations. Most Buddhist outfits I've been to, it's a very vertical power structure. Whereas 12-step program, it's totally horizontal. There's something about everybody having an equal voice that's really helpful. And also just the principle of anonymity, really great. Like with Buddhist teachers, I mean, my sense, like when I think of us Buddhist teachers that have gone wrong, like, should I name names? Like Chogyam Trungpa or Richard Baker or that Rolls Royce guru, I don't know. People really, they're very charismatic people. And maybe they had some they had some experience of waking up. But the thing I like about 12-step program is that it's about growing up, one day at a time, little incremental bits. And that, the thing about 12-step that helps me is that it taught me how to metabolize my own suffering, which that's a skill set and it's a learned thing, but it came from program, but also with program, what I like is that this idea of emergence, where like if you have one ant's not very special, but you put all these ants together and they make this fantastic like colony or something. But in program, it's like that too. Like you get a bunch of wasted drug addicts together and then some wisdom emerges from the group that's bigger than the group. So that's very powerful to me, as opposed to like, one person on top, like delivering like Moses, telling it like it is or something. So anyway, plus there's lack of oversight. In a lot of Buddhist places, there's nobody, in cultural context. Like people who come from Asia and then they speak in the United States, they get a thing in the United States, but there's no checks and balances. Anyway, you got me thinking about a lot, and it's just really useful. But thank you. Also, just the sound of your voice is like so pleasurable to me. I mean, I've heard you talk so much. It's like I should make a little phone recording of you speaking when I go to bed at night, because it's got a very tranquilizing effect on me. Anyhow, thank you for that. And Cynthia, do you want to chime in?
Sure. Yes. Thank you very much. It was a great talk, and it got me thinking a lot too. What really rang true for me was your statement about humility, and humility is something that we talk about in recovery a lot. Trying to right size yourself and not become